Hi everyone, thanks for joining. It's Ray with Tarot Living. So today we have Chili Bird with us and we'll see how long that lasts. She can be a good guest and sometimes not such a good guest, so we'll see how it goes. So today we're actually going to be looking at court cards, and in particular, as we move along through this video series, we're going to be looking at court cards and their astrological attributions. But before we do that, we really have to lay some groundwork. So we're going to be doing that in video intro 1 and 2 for court cards. So the first thing I want to talk to you about today is just court cards in general. A lot of people struggle with reading court cards, and you are not alone if you are struggling with that. Most tarot card readers don't really enjoy court cards as being their favorite thing. So if they're doing a reading and court cards come up, sometimes it can actually be relatively distracting if you're talking about what might be going on with the person and you're looking at the minor arcana. I find it can be slightly distracting at times and kind of cause some difficulties with the flow of your reading. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I've heard that many times. A lot of people struggle with court cards. And the reason is, I think, probably the main reason is that there's not just one way to read a court card. There's various methods and various aspects and facets that can come up when a court card arrives in a reading. And so that makes it very difficult because it's not black and white. It's not one thing. It's not one meaning. It can actually mean a variety of things, and we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail, I believe, in the intro number 2 video. So the first thing I want to talk about actually is some resources. So if you are serious about looking at court cards, you want to take a look at the resources that you have. So what books do you have? And I'm going to make 3 suggestions as well. So the first one is called Tarot Court. Mary Greer and Tom Little wrote this. And I actually have a video up that uses this book. So you can see I've got a lot of tags in it. I've used this book quite a bit. So this is excellent. And then this one is another tarot court card book, and it is by Kate Warwick Smith. And that particular book is good as well. It's a little bit less clear for me in terms of getting something, drawing something from it to really put into practice. However, it has some really interesting points in this one, and it has a unique way of looking at things overall. So I think that's definitely worth mentioning. And the other one is this monstrosity of a book that we all love, The Holistic Tarot by Annabelle Wen. And that has an entire chapter on court cards, and it's chapter 12. So if you have that book, you can go to chapter 12, you can read hers. If you don't have this particular book, I would recommend this one. And then a lot of other books, really do, mention court cards in a way that is fairly thorough. So for example, my favorite author, Tony Lewis, who is Anthony Lewis, he's written a variety of books, and he's written Tarot Plain and Simple, which is the book that I often recommend for beginners, and he does a good job on the court cards as well in terms of explaining the basics of them and then the keywords. So those are some resources for you. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about in terms of tarot court cards is actually rank. So you may or may not have heard that term, and it is a term that is used in relation to what position within the court card an actual card is. So for example, the page would be, a younger person that would be of lower rank. Bear with me because I know some of these authoritative comments are a little dated at times, but a rank is somebody, who has age, experience, maturity, and so the page would be considered the youngest with the least amount of, age, maturity, and experience. The knight would be a fairly young person. I think they say often up to 40. He's got more experience, but tends to not have a ton of maturity yet and isn't necessarily in a position of power or authority. Queen typically, would be female, however, can show up in readings for males, and we'll discuss that more at another time. But a female figure who has a lot of experience and maturity, but isn't necessarily exerting that over others. I consider her more working with and receiving, giving and receiving of information and knowledge, but not necessarily exerting authority over others as much as the king. And so the king would be the highest rank and considered, the leader, having the most experience and exerting, can exert power over others, or also be in a position of teaching others and being in that power position. So those are the 4 ranks. Those are just really basic. That's basic information about the ranks. So I just want you to be familiar with that term. So in terms of how we discuss rank and how we characterize, I guess you could say, what a rank is, it's not always one thing. So there's a few different characteristics that you can actually look at for rank. So the one thing is really power, and we touched on that a little bit, but let's talk about it a bit more. I mean, years ago when tarot cards, were created, it was a much more hierarchical, environment, and people could exert power and control and authority over others, and you were always probably very aware of your position and of your rank. It's obviously our society, pardon me, our society is much more, there's much more equality now in our society, but we still see that in certain ways, and so it may not be as overt, but we still see it. So in families, for example, we see that the children obviously, don't have as much, experience or authority, and the parents do. In your workplace, you were perhaps the person who is working, on the material, working, handling things, doing things. You're kind of like the worker bee, perhaps, and then you have someone who's above you who has some level of authority, or control over the environment, who is your boss. So that's just a couple of examples of where we see, obviously some level of rank and some level of authority that can occur just in general society. I mean, that's just the way things go. It can happen. So that is just something to think about, that at times if you pull a card, let's say it's a king, and you think that that's relating to someone else, it could be someone who has some level of experience or authority over you. And we will go into that in more detail. Right now I'm just describing the ranks and the characteristics of the various ways that you can look at the ranks. So the other way that you can look at it is actually more progression of age or maturity, which we touched on. So maturity, would really be that ability to have gone through life, experienced a lot of things, and then having kind of a calming effect where, you are solid and you're secure in the way that you know how things work, and that there's a maturity about you. And so it's really just a progression as you go through life. So if you pull a card that's, the king as opposed to the page, if you think that it relates to a level of maturity, then obviously the page is going to have a lower level of maturity and the king the highest level of maturity. Also, another thing to think about is wisdom and mastery. And I think I'm going to actually read a couple of excerpts out of some books and talk to you about a couple of excerpts. But I think wisdom and mastery is one of the things that's overlooked a little bit in rank. So the page obviously would not have a lot of wisdom and not have a lot of mastery. He's going to be at the beginning stages of something, and the king is going to be at the later stage where he has wisdom and he has mastery over whatever it is that he's doing, and it's going to relate to that particular suit and that particular element that he's in. So I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts actually from some books that will help you understand where I'm coming from on this. So this is from the Tarot Court by Mary Greer and Tom Little. So this is page 51. So it says, maturity and authority often go hand in hand with a developmental attribute, culminating in wisdom or mastery. From this perspective, the page is a student. The knight is providing his skill by energetically facing the first real-world challenges. The queen has achieved mastery and confidence, and the king has achieved sufficient respect and stature to assume a persona of public command. Alternatively, the queen and the king can be seen as having achieved equal levels of mastery, but having different styles. And that's really important because really they both have mastery, they both have authority, but they have very different styles because one is a feminine and one is masculine energy. or active and passive, however you want to look at it. The King's mastery being more task-oriented, and the Queen's more relationship-oriented. So that's just a really good synopsis of what I'm trying to get at. Okay, and I also want to read something from this book, which is the Pagan Tarot, and it goes with the Pagan Tarot deck, obviously. And there was something in this book about court cards that always struck me, and it always stuck with me, and I want to share it with you. They have 4 ranks as well in the court cards. They call them something different, but it doesn't matter. They're basically the same types of ranks. And what struck me about this particular deck is the way that she described the Queen and the King, what she calls initiate and elder. And the initiate, which is the Queen, is really somebody who has mastery. They're talking about having mastery and having growth, but there's more growth yet to come. But the difference between the initiate and the elder, which is the King, and I think this is such a good point, is that the elder has achieved the highest level of power that's possible along the given path. In order to continue, the elder must pass on the knowledge and the experience to someone coming up on the path. So no further accomplishment is possible without teaching in some way and helping others in some way. And I think it really speaks to the masculine quality of the King, that they often have the King in a position where he's dealing with the public, or he's dealing with others, and he's helping coordinate. So if you have someone who's a manager at work, they're helping coordinate the other people. They're showing, they're managing, they're training perhaps. So it's all about passing along and doing so in a very active way. Whereas I think the Queen has mastery, but she's still sort of holding it close, and she's having maybe personal relationships, and she's sharing that with others, and she has mastery, and she certainly is utilizing her mastery in a positive way, but she's not necessarily in a public role as the King is. And so there's an active public kind of role that comes along with the King. And so in that rank, just sometimes think about that. Are you passing along your information? Are you dealing with others? Are you having to teach others? Are you managing others? And there's a role in there if we're looking at the rank. So that's something that I wanted to mention as well. Okay, and the last thing I want to actually talk to you about is which element is associated with each rank. So we just went through all 4 ranks, and believe it or not, every rank is actually attributed to an element. And this is independent of whichever suit it's in. So I had all of the wands out. We're not talking about the wands now. If I pulled out the swords, we're not talking about the swords. We're actually not talking about the suit that they're in at all. We're talking about the rank, so the page, the queen, etc., and which element is intrinsically associated with each rank. And it is a very complex subject that relates to the Tetragrammaton and the Kabbalah, and it relates to a lot of very esoteric concepts. And we're not going to go into each one and all of the levels and the layers in detail, but I'm just going to let you know what the common ranks are that are used. Unfortunately, there is a debate that still goes on even to this day. I picked up a really recent book by Tony Lewis. I think it was like The Complete Guide to Tarot that he just put out recently. And he's talking about that debate. It carries on. And I'll tell you about that in a minute, which debate it is. But let's talk about the ones that are really easy first. The ones that are easy are actually the feminine elements. So the pages are earth. All of the pages, regardless of which suit it is, are all related to earth. All of the queens, regardless of which suit they're in, are related to water. So you'll notice that these are the feminine elements, and they are not hotly debated, and the page is always earth, and the queen is always water. Regardless of what system you pick up, I think you'll find that to be true. And then here comes the big debate. The big debate is really whether the knight is air or fire, and whether the king is air or fire. So it's about 50-50 if you read books. A lot of people put the knight under air and the king under fire. And some people have switched it back around because of the Golden Dawn's original system. And I'm not going to go into the details of why that is, because It's like crossing the Rubicon. Once you go there, you're in an abyss that has kept me up at night. So I won't go there in detail. But I think for our purposes, I have decided that we will go ahead with the basic theme that comes across, which is the Queen being water, of course. In the Tree of Life sits on Bina, this Sephira Bina, and the King, which is fire, would sit in Hokmah. And so we're going to go with the King being fire. And the Knight is air, and so the Knight would go on Tiferet, which is the 6th Sephirot. So that is where we're going to put the Knight. So it's an air. So the King is fire, and the Knight is air. So you can just write that down. King, fire, Knight, air. If you want to read more about that, there's a little bit on the internet that you can read about it. You can also go into Tony Lewis's book, The Complete Guide. What was the original one called? Not The Complete Guide, but this one, Tarot Beyond the Basics. He has some information in there about it. And then his new book, which is about the same size as that, it's called The Complete Guide to the Tarot. Corinne Kenner, in Tarot and Astrology book, puts her kings in air and her knights in fire. So that one has the same one as Anthony Lewis. Complete Guide to the Tarot Illuminati has it the opposite way. So you can see the difficulty with it. So for our purposes, I think we're going to put the knights in air and we're going to put the kings in fire. So those are your 4 elements, and those are the basic things that you need to know about court cards. You need to know the rank, you need to know if they're masculine, feminine, and you need to know which element is intrinsically associated with it. And just to let you know that if, let's say for example, I'm just trying to find another court card, so I have another example. So let's say these are 2 queens. So we've got the Queen of Wands and the Queen of Swords. So we know that queens are all water. So they are intrinsically related to water, not related to their suit they're in. They're just all intrinsically water. So that means that it'll always be water of, and I'm telling you this because you'll read this in a lot of books and you'll be like, what the hell are they talking about? So it'll be water of fire. It'll be water of air, which is swords. So it's always water of whichever suit they're actually in, and so on and so forth. So Queen of Pentacles would be water of earth, and Queen of Cups would be water of water. So those are the queens. The Knight would be air of, so this is air of fire, etc., etc. And the Page would be earth of, etc., etc. So I just wanted to let you know that because you're going to see that a lot in books, and you'll kind of say, what do they mean, like air of fire? What the heck does that mean? So air of fire would mean Knight of Wands. So those are the basic things that you need to know about court cards in order for us to move forward. So from here in the second video, I'm going to be reviewing more information about how to interpret the court cards in readings. What do they mean? So there's 4 or 5 things that they can mean and how confusing that can be. And we're going to talk about some of the areas in some of these books that will come in handy, and ways that people describe some of those areas that you can interpret. So we're going to do that in the second one, and then I think the third video will be astrological attributions. So don't forget to tune in to the second, third, and etc. parts of this series. So thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much.